Buying a car has never been more expensive, but you need one, so what can you do? How do you avoid too much debt? Ted Michalos is here to discuss it, starting right now.
This is Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
Okay, so Ted, in the intro, I said buying a car has never been more expensive. That's what's in my script here. Is that true?
Depending on the car that you're buying, it is. The average price of a car has never been as high as it is right now.
Okay, so there you go. So there are...
That's new or used, right? That's
new
everybody.
or used. So there are pockets where they're really high and pockets where they might not be so high, or is it just the rising tide lifts all boats?
Let's use the latter rather than the former.
There you go. So, and don't put your car in the water.
I'm confused at the whole boat metaphor with the cars.
Stupidest metaphors. Who writes this stuff? Okay, stick to the script. That way we won't get into these troubles.
Right.
Okay,
and I have a script this weekend.
I know. There you go. You haven't looked at it yet, but then neither have I. So, okay, let's go with the premise that car prices are higher than they were.
Right.
Why is that?
Well, let's start with the basic stuff. Everyone seems to be blaming supply chain issues. You can't get the parts that you need for your car, therefore demand for a part supply goes higher, and then if there's a shortage of supply, everything gets more expensive.
Law of supply and demand.
Right. Father Guido Sarducci, that none of our listeners will know who he is.
I remember him. He was great. So what you're saying is it's greed.
That's what I'm saying. It's greed.
Okay, there you go. I wanted
That's
to
the short answer.
Make sure we were cutting through here as to what's going on. So if I'm a car manufacturer and I can only get so much of a thing that goes in a carburetor, do they still have carburetors?
Most of them don't.
Okay.
But you're going to make the car that you get the highest margins on and the one that you can sell for the most money. So, for example, what's an inexpensive car?
The car I drive.
But your car is a used car.
It's 12 years old,
and
yes.
I probably can't find your car in Auto Trader anymore.
No, you probably cannot. It's not in the black book either.
Right. But think of any car manufacturer. We'll pick Ford because I'm just picking Ford. It doesn't matter. We could pick anyone. Their least expensive models are now all those little kind of tiny sport utes, the Eco Sport, things like that are $20,000-$25,000. Can't get any of them on the lot because all the same chips that need to go into that car need to go into their new fancy dancy Mach-E electric car. And so if you're going to put them in one or the other, you're going to put them in the expensive one.
And how much does one of those electric cars cost?
Well, if you buy the stripped down version, which you'll never be able to find on the lot there, $55,000 or $60,000 to actually get it off the lot, it'll be $75,000, $80,000, $85,000, $90,000.
So we're talking big bucks here.
They're all big bucks. I mean, I was looking at pickup trucks just because I've got an old pickup truck and I'm not going to replace mine because the cost of a new one is just ridiculous.
Well, and so according to the Auto Trader Q1 report, a new car averages around $61,000. Is that even possibly true?
I'm sure that it's true.
And a used car can be like $40,000. Now, obviously, there's a much wider range there, but
there is. But I mean, part of the issues with used cars as well as it used to be, leases were very, very popular. They're not so popular anymore, and so the leases, you used to get a regular supply of cars coming off lease dumped into the used car market. They're not there anymore. So it's another thing that's affected supplies.
Yeah, I mean, I remember 25 years ago, when I graduated from driving 20-year-old cars to driving new cars, and of course I've graduated back, I would get a 3-year lease.
Right.
At the end of the 3 years, turn it back in, get the next one. So long as you're not over your mileage, everything is good. And it was those cars that would then become the used cars that people were buying. So you're saying that is less common now.
That's right. There are far fewer leases being written by anybody anymore.
And why is that?
Well, leases were always more expensive. I mean, the premise with a lease was if you're going to always be trading in your car every 3 or 4 years to get a new one, then why don't you do a lease? Because then you're not paying for the full value of the car. At the end of the lease, there's a residual value you're guaranteeing that the company will get for it, and you don't pay for it. You pay interest on that money during the whole period of the lease, but you're not actually paying the company for that value of the car because you're never accepting it. You buy a new car, you buy the whole damn car, so you pay for the whole thing. And that's why, at least historically, it looked like buying a new car was always more expensive than leasing a new car. But if you keep the car, at some point you stop paying the interest on the debt and you stop recycling these things over and over again. I mean, if we did the same study for how old the average car on the road is now, I think the average car is like 10 years old on Canadian roads. And that's a pretty high number. A decade ago, I bet it was 6 years old.
Yeah, and part of that had to do with the pandemic, and maybe we're not driving as much, and supply chain issues. And I guess the other part has to do with cost.
Part of it, and cars are actually better built than they used to be. I mean, I hate all this electronic crap because I can't work on my cars anymore without talking to a computer. But the fact of the matter is they're built to a higher standard and higher quality, so they last longer. I hate it when I see somebody getting a 7 or 8 year loan on a new car. That's the only way you can afford some of these prices. But the car's likely it's going to last that 7 or 8 years. You couldn't say that 20 years ago or when you and I started driving.
43 years ago, I believe it was, that I got my license when I was 5 years old. And back then, it was very common to see cars on the road that were all rusted out.
That's right.
It was just, that's the way it was.
Yep.
And I don't know why they don't rust now. Is it because they're made of plastic? Or
more plastic and better production techniques. And the cars you saw that were rusting out were, when they were switching from steel to aluminum to plastic and composites, and when they're the influx from cars from overseas. I mean, historically, when any new country started shipping cars to North America, their cars were crap for the first few years because they had no idea about the amount of salt that we use on our roads. You think back to the Hyundai Pony. I mean, it's just when it got 3 years old, they were all the same color, rust. That just didn't matter. But now they make great cars, so it's kind of it's a learning curve. I don't know what'll happen when the Chinese cars show up here.
I guess we'll wait to see. So we've mentioned Ford and Hyundai, and neither of whom are sponsors of this show. So if they want to start sending, although you kind of had a negative comment about the second, maybe they won't want to sponsor the show. So we're finishing season number 9, and we have yet to find a sponsor to pay us big bucks. So I'm really
tell them what show to go back where we started talking on this whole sponsor
exactly. So, okay, used car prices, you already discussed that. They've also been very high, but they have been coming down lately. I guess, shortages of new cars, I got to buy used, but I guess as the new cars become more...
And the buying cycle has changed for new cars. People now accept the fact that maybe I can't go in and buy one off the lot. I actually have to order it. And so we've been doing this now because of the pandemic for a couple of years, and people have gotten used to that. So the expectation has changed, and so if I know I've got a plan ahead to order my car, I don't go in desperate to drive a new car off the lot today, which means I don't need a used car if I can't get the new one. So some of the demand pressure is eased off.
Gotcha. So according to the Car Gurus Index, and we'll put links to this in the show notes, the average used car price is around $34,500. By body style, a used sedan costs on average $26,000.
Because nobody drives sedans anymore except for you.
What does that mean? It's got 4 doors?
4 doors, that's right. Everybody wants a sport ute now.
Oh, no, I got a sedan because you got to have this back door to put your briefcase in.
Yeah. In 5 or 6 more years, you won't be able to get in and out of your sedan.
Yeah, that's probably true, too.
Hey, can you help me with my door?
It's too low. Well, I get one of those lifts on it, I think, to lift me into it.
You'll be driving the same car in 5 years.
No doubt, so I'll be fine. So... and it's fine because you sort of fall into the car. My wife hates it because she just thinks it's crazy. But anyways, year over year, used car prices have declined by 1.6%. Used cars, according to the index, are down 3.5% year. So the 1.6 decline would be on the sedan. So they have eased off a bit, still higher than they were, let's say, a couple of years ago. So
in high demand cars, they won't have eased off at all. Right. So it all depends on what it is that you're looking for. And, are you trying to keep up with the Joneses? You got to have the newest and the greatest.
So, okay, we're supposed to be talking about money and debt here, not
about cars.
Not cars.
I'll suck you into the rabbit hole.
And I know nothing about them, so it's easy to do. So during the pandemic period, and even to a certain extent now, used car prices are pretty high compared to new car prices.
Right.
So is there any advice you can give on, should I be buying used? Should I be buying new? And I'll throw one data point at you from our Joe Detter study, which we've talked about here before. In last year, 2022, and we are recording this in July of 2023, our average client had an average negative equity on their vehicle of just over $9,000. So what does negative equity mean?
It means if you sold the car today, you wouldn't have enough money to clear out the loan. You'd owe us another $9,000 after the car was sold.
So I've got a $39,000 loan, but the car's worth $30,000. I sell it. I'm short $9,000. That's your negative equity.
Correct.
And that was actually a decline of almost 13% from the prior year.
But that's only because the used car values have gone up. It's not because anybody's doing anything more clever.
Right. So, and if used car prices start going the other way, which seems to be what's happening, then that negative equity will become a greater issue. Why is it that negative equity exists?
Well, so the most common reason is that when you decide you need a different vehicle, you've got some kind of residual amount on your existing loan. And instead of paying that off, you just roll it into the next vehicle. And the car companies all love doing that because they're making interest on those loans. So, for example, the car we were just talking about, you got a $39,000 loan, $30,000 car. You trade it in on the new one that cost you $61,000, according to the start of our show. But your loan now is going to be $70,000 because you had $9,000 that you brought forward from before. And so you just keep making payments.
And I'm going to have a 7 or 8 year loan in order to pay that off. Right. Otherwise, I'm paying a huge amount every month.
And so if the car lasts the 7 or 8 years, and it should, then you're okay. But again, what you're likely to do is somewhere around year 4 or 5, you're going to say, oh, it's been 5 years since I had a new car. I need to get a new one. And the cycle repeats itself.
Well, it's also possible that you get into an accident or something happens and you got to replace the car. And I'm told now they're coming out with cars that are powered by electricity instead of gasoline, which I don't understand how that works. But I guess if we get to the point where every car is powered by electricity, then I got to replace the gas car that I've got. So do you think that'll happen during my lifetime?
Not in your lifetime.
Okay, good. Because I'm old is what you're saying.
Well, and they haven't quite figured out the electric thing. If you've got an electric car, it's okay for jumping around town, but you got to plan your trip correctly if you're going intercity to stop and get it recharged every, 4 hours if you're lucky. And so you can stop at a gas station and fill up in 5 minutes. If you got to stop and fill up an electric car, you're going to be 45 minutes, assuming a charger is available.
And an electric car goes like what, 300 kilometers, 400 kilometers, something like that?
Yes, so the most common distance is about 400 kilometers if you're driving it around town. As soon as you start driving on the highway, that drops pretty significantly because there's no regeneration. And so probably a car that gets 400 around the city might get 320 on the highway.
Now, if I'm driving on the highway but I'm riding the brake, will that give me better
I suppose
mileage?
It would regenerate, but you wouldn't be getting very far.
There you go. So either way I lose. So,
you got to assume you're going to have to stop and charge every 3 hours or so.
Gotcha. And you're stopping for a period of time, not 5 minutes.
That's
so
right.
As a result, if I'm a long distance driver all the time, then probably not,
cars don't make a lot of
not
sense.
Ideal. And I guess I also have to have a place to charge it. So if I've got my own house and I can put in the fancy charging thing, I'm great. Yep. But if I live in a condo where there's no place to plug it in.
Well, that's the strange part of all of this. Remember, we had a meeting in Toronto a couple of weeks ago, and the first floor of the undercar garage literally had rows and rows of charging stations for electric cars. Most of them were empty because people weren't driving electric cars yet, but I don't know what they're doing for apartment buildings.
So, well, I guess if you pay the building $10,000 or $15,000, they'll retrofit it and do it for you. So, okay, so let's go to practical advice then.
Right.
And again, the premise of the show is that in a lot of cases, you need a car.
Right.
And we've got lots of clients. I mean, my clients in Toronto very rarely have a car because if you live downtown and work downtown, a car is a liability, not an asset. It costs a couple $100 a month just to park it. Plus you got the insurance and everything else. And you cannot drive around in downtown Toronto because it's just too plugged up.
But the rest of the world,
at
least in Ontario,
once you get out of the 416,
it's still based on cars.
Yeah. Like we're recording this at our studio in Kitchener, and we do have the streetcar right outside our office.
Right.
But it does not run to your house in Guelph and nor mine in, south of Cambridge. So you got to kind of have to have a car if you're going to get here. So if we assume that a car is essential in some case, I mean, the other obvious cases where, I work at a factory, my shift starts at 6 a.m. and the buses start running at, 5:45. There's no way I can get there in time.
Yep.
Or I've got kids and I got to schlep them around and it's kind of hard, not impossible, but, more convenient not to have to put the stroller and everything else and when I'm going to the doctor or getting groceries or whatever.
And all of our marketing in North America is still focused on a car-based economy. I mean, you're told you got to have a car just, again, to keep up with the Joneses.
So, okay, let's assume that in many cases a car is essential or certainly makes your life a lot easier. What is your practical advice then to not get overburdened with debt when you're buying a car?
So the first thing, and I'm going to try and give these in some kind of logical order, is how much car do you actually need? So you need to have in your own mind, how much car do I need? A sport utility vehicle, or I just want one because everybody does. Can I get by with a sedan? Do I need a pickup truck? How many seats am I likely going to use? So you and I were driving to work. 95% of the time, I bet our cars have one person in them.
That's true.
And I can't find a car that's suited to one person. They just don't make them, right?
That would be a motorcycle, I believe.
Yeah, and those aren't a good idea.
Not in the winter, that's for sure.
All right, so how much car do you need? That's the first question. Second question is, how much car can you afford? So you need to know both of these things before you go looking for a car. Otherwise, you are completely at the risk of the salespeople, because they're going to put you in whatever they've been told at that morning sales meeting is the car model that they got to move this week, and they'll find a way to make it the car that you've always dreamed of.
And how do they do that? So you go into the car place and they say, "Oh, Mr. Michalos,
we got this white one over there. I know you like white cars."
Yes, and it has turbo on the back, and everybody wants that. And imagine what it would be like driving to work on this car. So I think we all understand when we go and talk to a car salesperson, we're talking to a car salesperson.
Not everybody understands that, but you should, right?
That's interesting.
And something to keep in mind as well is most people over the course of their life, maybe if you're lucky, you buy 3 or 4 new cars. You probably buy 3 or 4 used cars. I mean, it depends on your preferences and how much money you're making. But the guys selling cars, they sell a car a day. Each one of those salesmen, they have to just to make their living. So who has all the power in that transaction? You who does it once every 4 or 5 years and really don't focus on it, or the person that does it for a living?
Yeah, and who knows all the tricks and everything.
Which emotional buttons to push.
Yep, and we're not criticizing them. That's their job. And I guess if you want someone to sell you a car, you got to talk to someone who sells cars. That's kind of how it works.
And if you want to defang that viper, then you need to know as much as possible before you go in for the transaction. So how much car you need, how much car you can afford. And then, quite frankly, you should be doing your own homework on the internet. So, all right, I think I need something in this particular size. So have a look to see what cars are out there in that particular size. Just about everyone has got some sort of brand bias. This is the car that my father drives. So you either love that brand or you hate that brand. And you kind of go from there. And I mean, the next thing I would do is once you narrow it down to specific sizes that you can afford, is start looking for some reviews. Figure out, again, you're trying to narrow the field so that when you go in and talk to the salesperson, you're not completely at their discretion to put you whatever you want.
The internet, I've heard of that. That's like AOL, right?
That's something like that.
Yeah, and MySpace. I know exactly what you're talking about.
That was my impression of a modem.
Excellent.
For you kids out there that don't know what a modem is.
So, what was the first reference we did? Father Guidar Sarducci, and now we're doing modems. So people are going, anybody less than the age of 50 has no clue.
A couple of old white guys talking on the radio. What the hell's a radio?
Fortunately, our listenership is all 80-year-olds, so it's perfect.
Right.
So, but I totally agree with you. So I go, okay, I would like a 1-seater, but they don't make that.
Right. And they never really did. I mean, I can give you a couple if you want, but they're very expensive.
Yeah. And so, okay, a 2-seater I understand, but a 2-seater is a sports car.
Which are more expensive than the 4-seaters.
So, which is why I drive a Honda Accord from 2011.
One of the reasons.
So, okay, I've narrowed it down to this is what I need. And obviously if I have, 3 kids and a spouse, I guess I need something that will fit 5 people.
Right. If you got a dog, if they got hockey equipment, I mean, there's all sorts of other factors you got to, and how often is it going to be used for that stuff?
Yeah, and I got to pull that thing on the trailer behind, so I need the engine that can do that and whatever. Or I'm mostly in the city. I want something as small as possible because it's a lot easier to get around and whatnot. So I narrowed down. And you use the word brand bias. I totally agree with that. It's exactly the same with banks.
Right.
You bank at the same bank you've always banked at. You buy the same kind of car you've always bought.
Yeah, they count on you not switching.
Right.
Like, I mean, I keep making comments about my pickup truck. Half the guys that drive trucks in Canada drive Fords. So they sell as many Ford pickup trucks as Chrysler and GM combined. We don't even talk about the Japanese ones because who gives a crap. But I mean, that's because we're all brand biased. But it's a pickup truck.
Mm-hmm. 4 wheels, got an engine. You can put stuff in the back.
That's right.
It's pretty much the same thing. So, and I guess there's some convenience to that too, because if I'm going to the dealership to buy the next one, then they know exactly what my current one's worth. They've got the used division, whatever. I already know all the service guys and so on. So, but what you're saying is focus first on what you actually need and what you can afford as opposed to what the brand is, because maybe the other manufacturer has actually got something that's more suitable. And just before we come back to that point, what is the level of promotions these days? Because back when I used to watch TV many years ago, every commercial was $8,000 off and free financing and all the rest of it. Is that come back? Is that still a thing or not so much?
So there are not a lot of promotions as far as price reductions or rebates and that sort of stuff going on right now. There are a couple of brands. Generally, they're the less popular ones that are still doing something. But most of the advertising you see is lifestyle. So, Audi is saying, we're the future. You've got to buy one of these and they're flogging their electric cars. well, Ford is flogging their Mach-E. The new expression or the new advertising slogan for, I think, Nissan is Thrillology, because their cars are thrilling. This is a little puddle jumper, but whatever.
Okay.
So the focus is on trying to convince you of the quality. They're forward thinking. It's a lifestyle choice. It's a status symbol. It's not all about we got 1% interest or we're going to give you a huge rebate. There's very little of that going on right now.
Yeah, this is why I'm out of touch, because to me, a car gets me from here to there.
But there's no reason to do any of that right now because they're driving the bus. There's no supply. You know you're going to have to go in and order something, and you never get a rebate on something you have to custom order because I'm making this car just for you.
Just for you.
Right.
So, okay, I figure out then this is what I need, and then what you're suggesting is I go on the interwebs and I go to the Ford site and the GM site and the Chrysler site and whatever, and I look to see what meets my criteria,
right?
And I do some research, read the reviews, whatever, talk to my friends, whatever else it is, and kind of narrow down that, okay, this is the kind of vehicle that would work.
Right.
And you can go online and build the vehicle, add these, add this, add that, whatever.
It'll also tell you what kind of dollars you're looking at. And they'll even calculate payments for you.
And that's the important element to this, because it's not just what you need, but what you can afford. So that way, when I go into the dealership, I've got my printout. I guess people still use printers, right?
I do.
Or it's on my phone, and it's like, okay, what I'd like to look at is this kind of make, this model with these things, and this is what I'm interested in.
And all of that research also tells you that, okay, well, maybe I can get away with a used car if it meets all of these criteria, if it's low mileage or if they've got a good reputation for lasting longer, that sort of stuff. So this isn't homework just for new car buyers. It's for used car buyers as well. But even if you're shopping for a new car, the homework you just did might actually put you in a used car anyway.
So if you were going to be buying a used pickup truck,
right,
how would you go about doing that? Would you go to the dealer's used car lot? Would you go on some website? Like, what would your process be?
Yeah, I'd probably start on the websites. I mean, the most common one now everybody's using is Auto Trader, that sort of thing.
Are they a sponsor of the show?
Well, they aren't. And you also mentioned Car Gurus. That's another good
there
one.
We go. Okay. Yep.
All of this stuff's available online, so you can at least get an idea for what's available and what the price is going to be like.
Yeah, and if you're not in a panic that you have to buy it tomorrow, you can take a week or 2 or 5 and look around and get a sense of what's out there.
Well, and that's a critical element to it. The more time pressure you put on yourself, the less of a deal you're going to get. If you go on the lot thinking, I got to get out of here with a car today, you're pretty much screwed. Whereas if you can take the time to say, wait a minute, I can wait till I find exactly what I want. I'm willing to put up with some delays. I'm willing to compromise a little bit, you'll get a better deal.
And that's a great strategy for dealing with any kind of salesperson.
Correct.
Not just a car salesperson, but anyone that, okay, well, I'm not planning to buy it today. I'm just kicking the tires.
Right.
Hey, there's an expression that might catch on. And here's what I'm interested in. This is what my price point is. Do you have anything that meets that? You don't? Okay, cool. No problem. I'll check back. I'm, going around and looking to see what's out there. So
now, one thing you can't tell from the internet, you can't actually tell what it's going to feel like to sit in the vehicle. I've bought a number of cars by ordering them and waiting them to show up because I like cars. And almost always there's something that's annoying about the new car that if you'd have been able to sit in it and drive it, you might have said, well, wait a minute, this is an unattractive feature.
The button's in the wrong place, or I can't get the seat the way I like it. Or
that's right.
Whatever else would possibly go wrong in a car.
So once you get to the point where you've narrowed down your list, I still think it's worthwhile to go in and try and drive them.
And then make the final decision.
And I got to watch, because that final decision now is going to be emotionally based on how you responded to both the salesman and the car that you actually drove. Yeah,
because it's got that new car smell, so I definitely want to buy it. Well, and I guess...
And you can get that in a can, You
can? That's fantastic. They should also sponsor the show. New car in a can. And I think that's one of the reasons why brand bias isn't a bad thing.
Right.
Because if I was to buy another Honda, I don't know if they've changed them in the last 12 years or not, probably not. I assume that, okay, that button is still that button. And, well, I'll give you the classic example. The gas thing is on the left-hand side in every Honda. But is that true for every make and model?
No, most European cars, it's on the right because they put their gas stations on the, it's just how it came about.
It's different. Yep. But for me, it's like, okay, I'm in the habit of pulling in on that side, so that's what I'm going to buy.
Right.
And I guess now I don't know if that would be a deal breaker, that if the gas tank was on the other side or not.
No, but you'd feel like an idiot for the first half a dozen times you did it the wrong way in the new car.
And pulling the hose, it would probably be a real disaster. So okay, so your advice is, how much car do I need? What can I afford? And then actually do some research. Let's talk about this whole afford thing.
Right.
That's a good word there.
Big problem.
So I go into the car dealership and they tell me the new car you want to buy is $61,821 because that's the average price of a new car.
After they pick you up off the floor.
Yes. And that doesn't include taxes because I assume they put taxes on cars.
And administrative fees. That's the one that really gets people going. So there's delivery charges and then there's other. I mean, it just gets buried on top of the purchase price.
So it's a lot more. So what should I be focusing on then? Is it the price of the car, the payment, the interest rate, the length of the loan? Like where should my focus be?
So I think you've got to, if you're looking at some kind of monthly budget, you've got to focus on what the actual payment's going to be. And then you've got to decide how long are you willing to make that payment for that particular vehicle.
Yeah.
So now we're talking about it. Can I get away with 5 years, 6 years, 7 years? Do I have to be one of those fellas with an 8-year car loan? I hope you're not.
Which is obviously you're paying a lot of interest. But you got to, and the salesperson might say, oh, the biweekly payment is only $200. Right. That sounds like a low number, but if you're doing that for 8 years, it becomes a much bigger number.
Well, and if you put your budget together on a monthly payment, you got to multiply that biweekly payment by 2.15, so it's $430. So now the number's getting bigger.
Yeah, so you got to be conscious of that. Do you really need a car?
Yeah, that's a fundamental question. And again, but it's back to how much car do you need, which was our first question.
That was your first point. So it's not how much car do you need, but do you need a car?
At all.
Again, I've got lots of clients, particularly who live in the city, who is like, well, a car is great when I need to go to Costco and visit my mother and do this and do that, but that's once every 2 or 3 weeks.
And you can rent one.
Yeah. And I remember one client very distinctly who would rent a car on a Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock because that was her day off, and she would return it before 5 o'clock. So she never had it overnight, and she had to deal with the car rental place that every 2 weeks I'm coming in to rent one.
And depending on the model, it cost her $50, $60 bucks.
It was not way cheaper than owning a car because it would have cost her the same amount just to park a car, let alone insurance and everything else. So,
well, and if you think about it, your car, most of the time, it just sits there doing nothing.
Yeah, 98% of the time.
Just like your house.
So that's right. I sleep in my house, not my car too often.
Right.
So do the math. And if I was to take an Uber when I go to the grocery store, how much does that cost? If I did rent a car couple of times a month, how much would that cost, and compare it to owning the car myself with insurance and gas and maintenance and all the rest of it. Yep. And you may find that it's actually cheaper to be either renting or cabbing it, as we used to say.
Yeah, I'm surprised apartment buildings haven't glamoured onto the whole car share thing. Like, so you buy into a condominium in Toronto and the condominium has a fleet of 20 cars that you can book that they own.
Well, I guess there are already a bunch of services that do that. So it's like, well, the car share is parked right across the street anyways, and so is the bike thing and everything else. Yep. So maybe it's less necessary. So final question, should you also be thinking about 5 years from now when you're purchasing a car? Does your timeline matter? If I'm I'm starting a family and getting a dog in a year or 2 or 3, do I factor that into my decision making now, or do I wait till I get there?
Depends on whether or not you're financing this car or not. So if you're buying the car outright, then when you want to switch cars really is moot. You can do it whenever you want. If you got a 7-year loan and 3 years from now you think you're going to trade it, you know you're going to have a shortfall, because it generally takes about 2/3 of the loan's life to get to the point where you're equal to the value of the car. So if you get a 5-year loan, somewhere around year 3.5, you're probably at the point where if you sold the car, it would pay off the debt. If you get a 7 or 8 year loan, you got to get into year 6. I mean, it's just simple math. Yeah, and if 6 years from now I'm likely living in another town, I'm married, I got 2 kids, a dog, and a goldfish, then this little 2-seater that I bought perhaps is not as practical. And so we go back to the beginning of the show where the average person has a shortfall of $9,300 on their car. So you owe more money than your car is worth. Yeah. So if there's any way you want to get as cheap a car as you can. Right. Cheap in terms of least expensive. Right. Because that just gives you that much more flexibility. Right. And then, so there's a flip side to all of this too, folks. So if you're selling your car privately instead of trading it in on something, you got to remember that when you trade it in, it reduces your HST by the value of whatever the car is off the new purchase price. If you sell it to your buddy, then you haven't got that reduction off the HST, so your new car is going to cost you that much more. So it's something that most people usually forget.
I would forget that. And again, crunch the numbers.
Right.
What's the deal going to be? And when you are upgrading to a new car, how's that going to affect your insurance premiums too?
That's right.
Because presumably a new car has higher insurance costs than a...
Well, it may not anymore. It depends on the make and the model, because they're more dependable. If you're picking a car that gets stolen all the time, well, then your insurance is going to go through the roof.
So that's something you want to actually consider, I guess. If you are switching brands or models, hey, talk to the insurance company and see how much more is this going to cost me.
And all this is great to say, and most people will, I'm going to go out to buy a car today.
Yep. I want the car. I want to buy the car. And I get that. Right. I mean, it's
got the big chicken on the hood. Yeah. But wait a minute.
And if you do drive to work every day, then you want something that's comfortable. So I'm not trashing any of that. You're a car guy. You understand that.
I am.
The purpose of this show is just to get people to focus on the numbers side of it as well, so that you're making an informed decision.
And folks, the numbers we've been throwing around here, your house is your biggest single purchase, and you may be fortunate enough to do that 3 or 4 times in your life. Car is likely the second biggest investment you're ever going to make. Some people would argue in education, but based on the new cost of a new
More
car,
than an education,
cars now are winning over educations, and you're going to do that 5 or 6 times. So it's worth the effort and the time to make sure you're doing it to optimize what you're doing for yourself. Get the best deal you can get.
Hopefully we've given you some practical advice to do that today.
That's right.
Ted, thank you very much. That was episode number 464 of Debt Free in 30. That's a lot of episodes.
It is.
It's a lot of episodes. So if you're watching...
still no sponsor.
I know. We're trying, man. We're trying. Not trying very hard, but so if you're watching on YouTube, you know the routine. Like, subscribe. We are now, I don't know, well over 10,000 subscribers, which for a show about debt is pretty good. Most of our listeners prefer the audio version, I guess, so they don't have to look at us.
We do have perfect faces for radio.
That could be the reason. So no problem. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, everywhere else. So again, please subscribe. Next week, you are coming back.
I am.
Back-to-back episodes with Ted. It'll be episode number 465.
Bring your popcorn.
Our final show of season number... Now, did you know we had seasons on this show? We have seasons.
Seasons in the wind?
No, I don't know why we have seasons, but we do. So season number 9 comes to an end with the season finale episode, and what we're going to do is review what's happened for the first 7 months of 2023.
We're at episode 464, and we're at 9 seasons. Mm-hmm. I don't understand the math. Did we do some Christmas specials?
Yes, exactly. Well, because in the month of August,
we did 5.
We do 52 times 9. How much would that be?
468.
Okay, so that's pretty close, because we've still got 4 more shows in August.
You're doing fine.
So we'll be fine here. I'm thinking, have we only done 10 seasons? What have we done here? So next week we're going to take a look back at what's happened. Now you will recall we did our year-end prediction show.
How are we doing this year?
We're going to find out halfway through the year, and then we're going to sort of set up what we think is happening for the last half of the year. There's a bunch of stuff happening.
There is.
The world is moving fast, so that's what we'll be discussing next week. So until next week, thanks for listening. I'm Doug Hoyes. That was Debt Free in 30.